The morning I realized I'd become disposable was ordinary in every way. The September sun filtered through my kitchen curtains, casting soft patterns on the worn oak table where I'd served thousands of family meals. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten, as I stared at my phone, reading the message that had just shattered my world into a million glittering, painful pieces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. We're ready to take the kids back full-time. You deserve a break after all these years. We've already found you a nice senior living apartment in Meadowbrook. My own daughter, Beverly, had just texted me, not even called, to inform me that, after 7 years of raising her children as my own, I was being put out to pasture. 7 years of school lunches and midnight fevers, of homework battles and birthday parties, of holding my grandchildren while they cried for parents who rarely showed up. And now that they were finally well-behaved, now that the hardest years were behind us, Beverly and her husband Craig suddenly wanted to play house. My hands trembled as I set down my phone. In the next room, I could hear Zoe, age 10, practicing her violin. Down the hall, 8-year-old Noah was still asleep, his gentle snores a reminder of how my home had become theirs. These children were my heart now. And Beverly wanted to rip them away because she finally found it convenient to be a mother. My name is Eleanor Wright. I'm 63 years old, and until recently, I thought I knew what the autumn of my life would look like. My husband Thomas and I had plans, a small RV to travel the country, perhaps finally seeing the Grand Canyon at sunrise. We had a modest pension, supplemented by Thomas's woodworking business and my part-time job teaching piano lessons. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. We had each other. We had dreams. That all changed on a rainy Thursday evening in April, 7 years ago. The doorbell rang just after dinner. Thomas and I were washing dishes together, him washing, me drying. A comfortable routine we'd perfected over 41 years of marriage. Who could that be at this hour? Thomas frowned, drying his hands on a dish towel. I remember every detail of what happened next. Beverly standing on our doorstep, mascara streaming down her face, clutching 2-year-old Noah while 3-year-old Zoe clung to her leg. A single suitcase sat beside them, pathetically inadequate for what I would later realize was a permanent arrangement. "Mom," Beverly sobbed, "I can't do this anymore. Craig and I are falling apart. We need some time to figure things out. Can the kids stay with you, just for a little while?" Thomas and I exchanged glances. We knew our daughter. Her little whiles had a way of stretching into forevers. But what could we do? These were our grandchildren, standing in the rain. "Of course," I said, already reaching for Noah. "Come inside." That night, Beverly stayed too, sleeping in her old bedroom while the children bunked with us. She was gone before dawn, leaving only a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you. I'll call you tomorrow." Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. The children's clothes multiplied in our spare bedroom. Their toys colonized our living room. Their routines became ours. Noah needed specific foods because of his sensory issues. Zoe had nightmares and could only sleep with the hall light on. They both asked daily when Mommy was coming back. Beverly called sporadically, always with excuses. She and Craig were in couples therapy. They were looking for a more family-friendly apartment. Craig was changing jobs. There was always a reason why now wasn't a good time to take back her children. Thomas tried to be patient. He converted his woodworking studio, his pride and joy, into a bedroom for the kids. He taught Noah how to build birdhouses and helped Zoe with her science projects. But I could see the resentment growing in his eyes, especially when we had to cancel our anniversary trip to Yellowstone, when we had to dip into our retirement savings to pay for Zoe's dental work because Beverly had forgotten to send their insurance cards. "This isn't what we signed up for, Ellie," he whispered one night after we'd finally gotten the children to sleep. I love those kids, but this isn't fair to us. I know, I said, because I did know. But what choice do we have? The choice came 18 months later, when Thomas reached his breaking point. Beverly and Craig had just canceled their weekend visit, the third time in 2 months, because they'd impulsively decided to take a trip to Miami. This is the last straw, Thomas said, pacing our bedroom while I sat numbly on the edge of our bed. They're using us, Ellie. They're living their best lives while we're raising their children. They're going through a rough patch, I defended weakly, though I didn't believe it anymore. They've been going through a rough patch for almost 2 years. Thomas's voice rose, then fell as he remembered the sleeping children. Meanwhile, we're putting off our retirement, draining our savings, and for what? So Beverly and Craig can post beach photos on Facebook? He was right. I knew he was right. But the alternative, calling family services, forcing Beverly to take responsibility, seemed unthinkable. These were our grandchildren. They'd already been abandoned once. How could we abandon them too? I can't do this anymore, Thomas said finally, his voice flat with finality. I love you, Ellie, but I can't keep living like this. What are you saying? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. I'm saying I need some time away, to think, to breathe. I thought he meant a weekend, maybe a week. I didn't realize. He was packing for good until I saw him filling his old military duffel bag. You're leaving? Just like that? My hands shook as I watched him fold his favorite sweater, the blue one I'd given him for Christmas 3 years before. Not forever, he said, not meeting my eyes. Just until we figure this out. Until I give up the kids, you mean? The words hung between us, heavy with accusation. He didn't deny it. Call me when Beverly steps up. The front door closed behind him with a soft click that belied the devastation it caused. I sat alone in our bedroom, now just my bedroom, and tried to figure out how I was going to tell Zoe and Noah that Grandpa had left too. That first year alone with the children was the hardest of my life. I had to take on extra piano students to make ends meet. I sold my grandmother's silver set to pay for Noah's therapy. I learned to fix leaky faucets and change air filters because Thomas wasn't there to do it anymore. Beverly's visits became even less frequent. Craig stopped coming altogether. On the rare occasions when Beverly did show up, she brought expensive toys, but no practical help. She'd spend a few hours playing the role of fun mom, then leave again, promising to return soon, promises the children learned not to believe. When people asked about Thomas, I made vague references to a trial separation. When they asked about Beverly, I said she was very involved from a distance, a phrase that grew more bitter on my tongue with each passing month. But as hard as it was, something unexpected happened during those years. The children and I became a team. Zoe started helping with dinner, standing on a stool beside me as we chopped vegetables together. Noah, who had once been so withdrawn, began building elaborate Lego creations that he proudly displayed on the mantel where Thomas's wood carvings used to sit. We created new traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, Friday night board games, summer evenings catching fireflies in mason jars. We weren't the family I had expected to have in my 60s, but we were a family nonetheless. By year 3, Thomas had moved 2 states away to Oregon. We spoke occasionally, stilted conversations that danced around the elephant in the room. He sent birthday and Christmas gifts to the children. He asked if Beverly had figured things out yet. He never asked if he could come home, and I never asked him to. Beverly and Craig officially divorced in year 4. Beverly moved to a small apartment that, unfortunately, didn't have room for the kids just yet. Craig disappeared entirely, surfacing only through sporadic child support payments that barely covered Zoe's violin lessons. By year 5, we had settled into a routine. I was no longer waiting for Beverly to take the children back. I was no longer hoping Thomas would return. I was simply living the life I had, teaching piano during the day, helping with homework in the evenings, tucking my grandchildren into bed each night. Then everything changed again. It started with Beverly, showing up for Noah's 8th birthday, on time, with a reasonable gift, and staying for the entire party. Then she came for dinner the following weekend, and the weekend after that. "You seem different," I observed cautiously after the children had gone to bed. We were sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where Thomas and I had once planned our retirement travels. Beverly twisted her hands in her lap. "I met someone," she admitted. "His name is Keith. He's different from Craig. Stable. Kind." I nodded, afraid to hope. "He has 2 children from his previous marriage," she continued. "They're with him every other week. He's a really good dad, Mom." "That's nice," I said neutrally, having learned long ago not to expect anything from my daughter. "He asked me to marry him." My eyes widened. "That's fast." Beverly laughed, a flash of her old defensiveness returning. "We've been dating for 8 months. I just didn't tell you because, well, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Because she knew I'd judge her for dating while her children lived with me. Because she knew I'd ask uncomfortable questions about her priorities. Because somewhere, deep down, she knew she'd failed as a mother. "Congratulations," I said. Because, what else could I say? "There's more," Beverly said, her voice brightening. "Keith bought a house, a big one in Oakwood Estates. 4 bedrooms, a yard. It's perfect, Mom." I felt a cold trickle of understanding begin to form. "Perfect for?" "For all of us," she said, her eyes shining with excitement I hadn't seen in years. "For me and Keith and his kids, and for Zoe and Noah, of course." The world seemed to pause, for a moment, as I processed what she was saying. After 7 years of being a mother to these children, 7 years of school projects and doctor's appointments and nightmares and first lost teeth, Beverly was casually announcing she was ready to take them back. Not because she'd finally grown up enough to handle parenting, but because she'd found a man who could do it for her. "The kids have school here," I said carefully. "Friends, routines." "Oakwood has amazing schools," Beverly countered. "Much better than here, honestly, and kids adapt quickly." "Noah still needs consistency. His therapist, we'll find him a new therapist. Keith knows someone, actually. His younger brother is on the spectrum." She had an answer for everything, as if she'd rehearsed this conversation. Perhaps she had. "When are you thinking of doing this?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "Well, Keith and I are getting married in June. We thought the kids could move in right after. That gives them the whole summer to adjust before school starts." June, 2 months away. After 7 years, she was giving me 2 months' notice that my entire life was about to be upended again. "Have you discussed this with the children?" I asked. Beverly shifted uncomfortably. "I thought we could tell them together. This weekend. Maybe?" I nodded mechanically, thoughts whirling. Of course the children should be with their mother. Of course that was the natural order of things. I had always known this arrangement was temporary, hadn't I? Hadn't I told myself that from the beginning? But after 7 years, could anything really be considered temporary? "There's one more thing," Beverly said, reaching for her purse. "Keith and I have been talking, and we're worried about you." "Me?" I almost laughed. "Why?" "You've been alone for so long, Mom. This big house, all by yourself. It's too much for one person to manage." "I've been managing fine," I said, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. "Still, we've been looking into some options for you." She pulled out a glossy brochure and slid it across the table. Meadowbrook Senior Living. It's really nice, Mom. Independent apartments, but they have activities, transportation, a dining room if you don't feel like cooking. No more worrying about yard work or repairs. I stared at the brochure, with its photos of smiling silver-haired people playing cards and doing water aerobics. You want to put me in a retirement home? It's not a retirement home, Beverly said quickly. It's an active adult community, and it would free you up to finally live your life again. You've sacrificed so much for us. Us. As if she had been part of the daily struggle. As if she had any idea what I had sacrificed. I'm 63, Beverly, not 83. I know, but with the kids leaving... She trailed off, then reached for my hand. We just want you to be happy, Mom. Happy. Would I be happy without the children who had become the center of my world? Would I be happy in a sterile apartment surrounded by strangers? Would I be happy watching my daughter swoop in and claim the role of mother after years of part-time parenting? I need to think about it, I said finally. Beverly smiled, relieved that I hadn't outright refused. Of course. Take your time. But we both knew she wasn't really offering me time. She was offering me the illusion of choice. The same illusion Thomas had offered when he packed his bag and walked out the door. After she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the Meadowbrook brochure. The faces of the models smiled up at me, their eyes empty of the grief I felt building in my chest. 7 years ago, my life had been upended when Beverly dropped off her children. Now it was being upended again as she prepared to take them away. But this time, I wouldn't be a passive participant in the dismantling of my life. This time, I had something Beverly didn't understand, something even Thomas had failed to see. I had become more than just a grandmother filling in for absent parents. I had legal standing, I had rights, and I had a plan. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Patricia Chen, a family law attorney I'd met through a parent-teacher conference. The second was to my bank, to discuss the children's accounts I'd been maintaining. The third was to Thomas. Ellie? His voice sounded distant, surprised. Is everything okay? Are the kids... The kids are fine, I interrupted. But Beverly's getting married, she wants them back. A long silence stretched between us. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Isn't that what we've been waiting for? Is it? I challenged. Because it seems to me like you've been waiting for it. I've been raising them. Another pause. That's not fair. Ellie. None of this has been fair, Thomas. Not to me, not to the kids. And I'm done letting other people decide our fate. I told him about Beverly's plans, about the Meadowbrook brochure, about the casual way she expected to uproot the children's lives, and mine, as if we were pieces on a game board she could move at will. What are you going to do? He asked when I finished. I'm going to fight, I said simply. The question is, are you with me or against me? For the first time in 5 years, I heard a spark of the old Thomas in his voice, the man who had once promised to stand beside me for better or worse. What do you need me to do? I smiled, a plan already forming in my mind. Beverly thought she could push me aside like an inconvenient piece of furniture. She thought that because she was the biological mother, she held all the cards. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The crisp morning air carried the scent of brewing coffee as I sat in Patricia Chen's office 3 days later. Her law firm occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house in the old part of town, with windows overlooking an ancient oak tree. Patricia herself had a calm presence that immediately put me at ease, something I desperately needed as I prepared to wage the battle of my life. So you've been the primary caregiver for 7 years, Patricia confirmed, reviewing the notes she'd taken during our initial phone call. And your daughter has maintained only sporadic contact? I nodded, clutching my handbag tightly in my lap. She visits maybe once a month, sometimes less. She's missed birthdays, school performances. Noah barely remembers living with her. Patricia made another note, her fountain pen scratching softly against the legal pad. And financial support? Her ex-husband, Craig, sends child support. Occasionally, but it's irregular and nowhere near what it costs to raise 2 children. Beverly contributes nothing except occasional gifts. I swallowed hard, hating how the words made my daughter sound. I've maintained their health insurance through my piano teaching association, paid for all their daily expenses, therapies, extracurriculars. Patricia looked up, her dark eyes sharp but kind. Mrs. Wright, I want to be very clear about something. In our state, grandparents who have been de facto parents for an extended period do have certain legal rights. But I won't pretend this will be easy. Courts generally favor biological parents, even those with questionable track records. I understand, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm not trying to keep the children from Beverly permanently. I just don't think it's in their best interest to be suddenly uprooted from the only stable home they've known, especially for the convenience of her new relationship. Patricia nodded. That's exactly what we'll focus on, the children's best interest. Not punishment, not revenge. Never revenge, I said quietly. I just want what's best for Zoe and Noah. The word revenge lingered in my mind as I drove home from Patricia's office. Was some small, wounded part of me seeking retribution for the years of being taken for granted? For the nights I'd spent alone after Thomas left? For watching Beverly post vacation photos from Cancun while I struggled to pay for Noah's occupational therapy? I pushed the thought away. This wasn't about punishing Beverly or Thomas. This was about protecting Zoe and Noah from another disruption in their young lives. About ensuring that if transitions happened, they would be gradual and considerate of the children's needs, not abrupt and convenient for the adults involved. When I arrived home, I found Thomas's truck in the driveway, the first time it had been there in 5 years. My heart constricted at the sight, memories flooding back of happier times when his return home was a daily certainty rather than a shocking surprise. He was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of coffee and chatting with Mrs. Hernandez, our elderly neighbor who watched the children after school. Mrs. Hernandez shot me a questioning look as I entered. It's all right, I assured her. Thank you for staying with them. After she left, an awkward silence fell between Thomas and me. He looked older, more weather-beaten than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and more gray in his beard. 5 years had changed us both. You cut your hair, he observed, gesturing to my silver bob that had replaced the long braid I'd worn during our marriage. 4 years ago, I replied, setting down my purse. Another silence. The kids at school? He finally asked. I nodded. They'll be home in about an hour. They don't know you're coming. Thomas winced. I wasn't sure how to tell them. Neither was I admitted. How exactly do you explain to children that their grandfather decided they were too inconvenient to stick around for? The words were sharper than I intended, years of hurt crystallizing into verbal daggers. Thomas flinched but didn't argue. I deserve that, he said softly. I know what I did was unforgivable. I'm not interested in forgiveness right now, Thomas. I'm interested in helping Zoe and Noah. That's why I called you. He nodded, accepting my terms. Tell me what you need. I sat across from him, keeping the table between us like a defensive barrier. Beverly is getting married to a man named Keith. They've bought a house in Oakwood Estates, and she wants to take the children immediately after the wedding in June. She also thinks I should sell this house and move into a senior living community. Thomas's jaw tightened. After everything you've done... Exactly, I cut him off. But indignation won't help us. I've spoken to a family law attorney. She thinks we have grounds for a formal grandparent visitation arrangement, possibly even... shared custody given the length of time the children have been with me. Us, Thomas corrected quietly. Given the length of time they've been with us. I raised an eyebrow. You left, Thomas. You don't get to claim credit for these past 5 years. He looked down at his coffee mug. You're right. I'm sorry. I continued, keeping my voice businesslike to mask the turmoil beneath. Patricia, my attorney, says our case would be stronger with both grandparents involved. She needs to know if you're willing to be part of this. Of course I am, Thomas said immediately. Whatever you need. I studied his face, searching, for signs of the man who had walked out when things got difficult. This won't be easy. Beverly will fight back. It will get messy and painful. If you're going to bail again when it gets tough— I won't, he interrupted, reaching across the table as if to take my hand, then thinking better of it. Ellie, I know I don't deserve your trust, but I want to make this right. For you, for the kids, for us, if there's any chance of that. I ignored the last part. There's something else you should know. I've been keeping records. Every visit Beverly missed, every school event she skipped, every time she canceled at the last minute. I have a log of every penny I've spent on the children that she and Craig should have covered. Statements from teachers, pediatricians, their therapists. Thomas's eyes widened slightly. You've been planning for this? I shook my head. Not consciously, no. I started keeping records for tax purposes, for insurance claims. But somewhere along the line, I think I knew this day might come. That Beverly might suddenly decide she wanted to play mother again, on her terms, with no regard for what the children need. Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he smiled, a small, sad smile that nonetheless reminded me of the man I had once built a life with. You always were the smart one, he said softly. The sound of the front door opening interrupted whatever I might have replied. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Noah always ran everywhere, despite my constant reminders to walk inside. And then the kitchen erupted in chaos. Grandpa! Noah shouted, launching himself at Thomas with such force that he nearly knocked over the chair. Zoe stood frozen in the doorway, her violin case clutched in front of her like a shield, eyes wide with disbelief. At 10, she remembered the day Thomas left more clearly than Noah did. She remembered the promises he'd made to visit often, promises that had gradually faded into birthday cards and occasional phone calls. Hi, Zozo, Thomas said softly, using his old nickname for her while still holding Noah in a bear hug. You're back, she said, her voice small and uncertain. Not a question, not an exclamation of joy, just a flat statement wrapped in layers of complication. Just visiting for now, I interjected, not wanting the children to have false hopes. Grandpa and I have some things to discuss. Zoe's perceptive gaze shifted between us, already sensing that something significant was happening. Is it about Mom wanting us to move? My heart sank. How did you know about that? Zoe shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, though her white-knuckled grip on the violin case betrayed her tension. She called me yesterday, said she has a surprise for us this weekend. I exchanged a glance with Thomas, a wordless communication that flowed between us despite the years apart. Beverly was already laying groundwork with the children, trying to present the move as an exciting adventure rather than the upheaval it would truly be. Yes, I admitted. It's about that, but right now, why don't you two get started on homework? We'll talk more at dinner. Noah groaned, but released his grandfather. But Grandpa just got here. And he'll be here through dinner, I assured him. Homework first, then you can tell him all about your science project. After the children reluctantly retreated to the dining room table with their backpacks, Thomas turned to me, his expression troubled. She's already talking to Zoe about moving, without discussing it with you first? I nodded grimly. That's Beverly. She's always preferred to create situations where others have to adapt to her decisions rather than having difficult conversations up front. She gets that from me, Thomas admitted with a grimace. I didn't contradict him. That evening, after a dinner filled with Noah's excited chatter and Zoe's cautious questions about Thomas's life in Oregon, we settled in the living room. I made hot chocolate, our traditional family beverage for serious conversations, and we gathered the children close. We need to talk about some changes that might be happening, I began carefully. Mom wants us to live with her and Keith, Zoe stated matter-of-factly, always one step ahead. Noah looked up in surprise. What? But we live here with Grandma. I took a deep breath. Your mom is getting married, and she and Keith have a new house with room for both of you. She would like you to go live with them after the wedding. Noah's face scrunched in confusion. But what about you? Would you come too? No, sweetheart. I would stay here. Then I don't want to go, Noah declared immediately, pressing himself against my side. Zoe remained quiet, her analytical mind working through the implications. Would we ever see you? She finally asked. Of course, I assured her, though in truth I wasn't certain how much access Beverly would allow if she got her way. But there would be changes, new schools, new routines. What about violin? Mrs. Abernathy says I'm almost ready for the youth symphony auditions in September. I'm sure there are music teachers in Oakwood, Thomas said gently. Zoe's eyes narrowed. But they don't know me. Mrs. Abernathy has been teaching me for 4 years. The conversation continued, with Noah growing increasingly agitated and Zoe retreating into the analytical stillness that was her way of processing difficult emotions. Thomas and I tried to present the situation as neutrally as possible, not wanting to put the children in the middle of adult conflicts. But their reactions confirmed what I already knew. This abrupt change would be traumatic for them both. After they went to bed, Thomas and I sat in the kitchen, the ghost of our former marriage hanging between us like an unacknowledged guest. They're not ready, he said simply. I nodded. No, they're not. Noah especially. Any disruption to his routine sets him back for weeks. And Zoe. She seems so mature sometimes that it's easy to forget she's still just a child. So what's the next step? I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. Patricia is filing for an emergency temporary order to prevent Beverly from removing the children from their current environment until a formal hearing can be arranged. It won't stop things permanently, but it buys us time. Thomas grimaced. Beverly won't take that well. No, I agreed. She won't. I was right. The following weekend, Beverly arrived with Keith to tell the children about their exciting new adventure. I had warned her about the temporary order, but she had dismissed it as just a misunderstanding that would be cleared up quickly. What she hadn't expected was the united front she encountered. Thomas had moved into a nearby extended-stay hotel and was present when they arrived. The children, while polite to Keith, showed none of the enthusiasm Beverly had clearly anticipated for her grand announcement. We've set up the most beautiful rooms for you, she gushed, showing them photos on her phone. Zoe, yours has a window seat like you've always wanted. And Noah, Keith built you a special shelf for your Lego creations. The children glanced at me uncertainly. That sounds lovely, I said carefully. But as I mentioned on the phone, we need to discuss a transition plan. Patricia has advised. Beverly's expression hardened. I still can't believe you involved a lawyer, Mom. This is a family matter. Exactly, Thomas interjected, his voice calm but firm. And as family, as the grandparents who have raised these children for the past 7 years, we have concerns about an abrupt change. Keith, a tall man with kind eyes who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the tension, finally spoke. Maybe we should all sit down together, with the lawyer, figure out what's best for the kids? Beverly shot him a betrayed look. What's best is for them to be with their mother. Their mother, who has visited 12 times in the past year, I couldn't help but point out. You're keeping score? Beverly snapped. I'm stating facts, I replied evenly. Facts that a family court judge will be interested in hearing. Beverly's face flushed with anger. Is that a threat? It's reality, Thomas said. Ellie has been the primary caregiver for these children while you've been otherwise occupied. That creates certain legal realities. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Beverly growing increasingly defensive and the children retreating to Noah's room to escape the tension. Only Keith seemed willing to consider compromise, suggesting a gradual transition over the summer rather than an immediate move. After they left, Beverly storming out with Keith following apologetically behind, Thomas and I sat amidst the emotional wreckage of the afternoon. That could have gone better, he observed wryly. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me, the first genuine laugh we'd shared in years. You think? Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, in the way that had once made my heart skip. At least Keith seems reasonable. Yes, I agreed. He might actually be good for her, and for the children, if it comes to that. When it comes to that, Thomas corrected gently. Ellie, we have to be realistic. Beverly is their mother. Eventually, they will likely live with her at least part-time. What we're fighting for is a voice in how that happens, not to prevent it entirely. I sighed, knowing he was right but hating to admit it. I know, they're my whole world now, Thomas. What am I supposed to do when they're gone? Move into Meadowbrook and take up water aerobics? The question hung between us, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Thomas hesitated, then reached across the table to take my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. Maybe, he said softly. You could consider Oregon. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal consultations, tense phone calls with Beverly, and increasingly direct questions from the children about what was happening. Through it all, Thomas remained steadfast, attending every meeting, helping with homework, repairing the broken step on the back porch that I'd been meaning to fix for months. His presence was both comforting and confusing, a glimpse of the partnership we'd once had, shadowed by the memory of its dissolution. Patricia advised us to focus on documenting the children's current routines and support systems. We gathered letters from their teachers, reports from Noah's therapist, evidence of their integration into the community through Zoe's orchestra and Noah's robotics club. We created a detailed history of Beverly's involvement, or lack thereof, in their daily lives. This isn't about attacking Beverly, Patricia reminded us during one particularly emotional meeting. It's about establishing that an abrupt change would be detrimental to the children's well-being. We're advocating for a transition plan, not permanent separation. Meanwhile, Beverly escalated her campaign to win the children's enthusiasm. Weekend visits became showcases of the exciting new life awaiting them, shopping trips for bedroom decorations, introductions to Keith's children, tours of their future schools. She returned them exhausted and overstimulated, with Noah usually having at least one meltdown the following day from the disruption to his routine. She's trying to prove she can be the fun parent, Thomas observed one Sunday evening as we coaxed an overtired Noah through his bedtime routine after a day at an amusement park. The one who lets them eat cotton candy for lunch and stay up past their bedtime. She's always been good at the fun parts, I said, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. It's the everyday responsibilities she struggles with. The legal proceedings moved forward with excruciating slowness. Beverly hired her own attorney, a sharp-suited woman who specialized in parental rights cases. They filed counter-motions, arguing that Beverly was being unfairly prevented from reclaiming her rightful role as mother. The temporary order remained in place, but the pressure mounted as the June wedding approached. Through it all, the children watched and listened more than the adults realized. One evening in early May, I found Zoe sitting alone on the porch swing, her legs drawn up to her chest, staring out at the twilight garden. "May I join you?" I asked, already anticipating her need for space. At 10, Zoe was beginning to crave moments of solitude, small tastes of independence. To my surprise, she nodded, scooting over to make room. We swung in silence for several minutes, the creaking of the chains a familiar soundtrack to our thoughts. "Grandma," she finally said, her voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear. "Do I have to go live with Mom if I don't want to?" My heart constricted. This was precisely the position I had hoped to avoid, the children feeling caught between adult battles. "It's complicated, sweetheart." "That's what adults say when they don't want to tell the truth," Zoe observed with precocious insight. I smiled despite myself. "You're right. The truth is, your mom is legally your parent, and parents usually get to decide where their children live." "But you've been my parent," Zoe insisted. "You're the one who knows that I like my sandwich cut in triangles, not rectangles, and that I need to practice violin before homework or I get too tired. You're the one who comes to all my concerts." I wrapped an arm around her small shoulders, pulling her close. "I will always be your grandma, no matter where you live. That will never change." "But it won't be the same," she said, a tremor in her voice betraying the tears she was fighting. "Nothing will be the same." I had no comforting platitudes to offer, no reassurances that weren't potentially empty promises. Instead, I simply held her as the twilight deepened around us, the weight of her trust a burden and a privilege I wasn't ready to relinquish. That night, after checking that both children were asleep, I called Thomas at his hotel. He answered on the first ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "Ellie? Is everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "Zoe asked me if she has to go live with Beverly if she doesn't want to." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that it's complicated, that Beverly has legal rights." "But Thomas, she's so upset at the thought of leaving, and Noah will be even worse once he fully understands what's happening." "Have you considered asking for their input at the hearing?" Thomas suggested. "Children their age are sometimes allowed to express preferences." Patricia mentioned that possibility, but I'm reluctant. I don't want them to feel responsible for adult decisions. "But they're already in the middle of this, Ellie. They're already feeling the weight of decisions being made about their lives without their input." He was right, and I knew it. But the thought of putting Zoe and Noah through the stress of legal proceedings, of potentially forcing them to choose between their mother and grandmother, was almost unbearable. "There has to be another way," I said, more to myself than to Thomas. "Maybe there is," he replied thoughtfully. "What if we propose a compromise? A phased transition, starting with weekends, then perhaps split weeks, working toward longer periods. With Beverly and Keith?" "She'll never agree," I sighed. "She wants them fully moved in after the wedding. She's already registered them for summer activities in Oakwood." "Then we need leverage," Thomas said simply. "Leverage? What do you mean?" Thomas hesitated. "Remember the college accounts we set up for them? The ones we've been contributing to all these years?" "Of course. I've maintained them even after you left. Every birthday check, every bit of extra money I could scrape together. Beverly doesn't know about those, does she?" I sat straighter, beginning to understand his thinking. "No, she doesn't." "How much is in them now?" "Combined," I mentally calculated, "around 38,000. Not enough for 4 years of college, but a good start." "Enough to be significant," Thomas noted. "Enough to get her attention." "You're suggesting we use the children's college funds as bargaining chips?" I questioned, uncomfortable with the idea. "Not exactly," Thomas clarified. "I'm suggesting we remind Beverly that our involvement in the children's lives has tangible benefits beyond daily care. That as grandparents, we have resources and commitment that will be valuable to the children's future. Resources we're happy to continue providing if we remain meaningfully involved in their lives. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it was a reminder of reality, that Beverly's impulsive decision to reclaim full parenthood failed to account for the ecosystem of support the children had come to rely on. "I'll think about it," I promised. "But Thomas, if we go this route, it changes things. It makes this adversarial in a new way." "I know," he acknowledged. "But Ellie, it's already adversarial. Beverly made it that way when she decided to upend the children's lives without consultation, when she dismissed your role in their upbringing, when she tried to shuffle you off to a retirement community." The harsh truth of his words settled over me. This wasn't the relationship I wanted with my daughter. This wasn't the example I wanted to set for my grandchildren about how families resolve conflicts. But sometimes, when protecting those you love, you have to fight with the weapons available to you, even when using them breaks your heart. The morning of Beverly's wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect June day that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my sage green dress, purchased weeks ago when I still believed I would be attending the ceremony as a proud mother rather than a legal adversary. The invitation remained on my dresser, its elegant calligraphy now a painful reminder of how quickly family ties can unravel. Beverly had called 3 days earlier to rescind it, her voice cold and controlled as she informed me that my presence would create unnecessary tension on her special day. The fact that Thomas had never been invited in the first place was a wound he bore silently. "Are you sure you don't want me to drive you?" Thomas asked from the doorway, already dressed, in khakis and a button-down shirt for his day with the children. While Beverly celebrated her new beginning, he would be taking Zoe and Noah fishing at Miller's Pond, a small attempt at normalcy amid the chaos. I shook my head, securing a silver earring. "No, I need to do this alone." He nodded, understanding. Without further explanation, that had always been one of Thomas's strengths, knowing when to push and when to step back. At least, it had been before the strain of raising our grandchildren had pushed him past his breaking point. "The kids are almost ready," he said. "Noah can't find his lucky fishing hat." "Check the laundry room," I suggested. "I washed it yesterday." Thomas lingered in the doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "You look beautiful, Ellie." The compliment caught me off guard, stirring feelings I'd carefully compartmentalized years ago. "Thank you," I managed, turning back to the mirror to avoid his gaze. After they left, Noah chattering excitedly about catching a monster fish, while Zoe pretended not to be equally enthusiastic, I sat alone in the kitchen, reviewing the documents Patricia had prepared. Not legal papers this time, but a comprehensive proposal for a transition plan that put the children's needs first. The plan outlined a gradual shift over 6 months, weekends with Beverly and Keith expanding to include some weekdays, joint decision-making, on educational and medical matters, guaranteed grandparent visitation, and a review process to ensure the children were adjusting well. It was reasonable, thoughtful, and centered entirely on what would benefit Zoe and Noah, rather than the adults' convenience. Beverly had refused to even look at it when I'd tried to share it last week. "I don't need your permission to parent." "My own children," she'd snapped, the words cutting through the phone line like shards of glass. Today's approach would be different. Patricia had advised against confronting Beverly on her wedding day, but I knew my daughter. She'd chosen this date deliberately, believing the significance of the occasion would strengthen her position, that I wouldn't dare disrupt her perfect day. She'd underestimated both my determination and my understanding of timing. I wasn't going to the ceremony or the reception. I wasn't there to make a scene or demand attention. Instead, I planned my arrival for the brief window between when the wedding party would be taking photographs at Oakwood Gardens before proceeding to the country club for the celebration. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered the documents, securing them in a slim leather portfolio, a Christmas gift from Thomas years ago. I touched the worn leather, drawing strength from the memory of happier times. then resolutely picked up my car keys. The drive to Oakwood Gardens took 30 minutes, each mile bringing me closer to a confrontation I dreaded but could no longer avoid. The Botanical Garden was a popular wedding venue, its manicured lawns and blooming rose arbors providing a romantic backdrop for countless couples' special days. Today, it would serve as the battleground for a very different kind of negotiation. I parked some distance from the main entrance, not wanting to announce my arrival prematurely. Through the ornamental iron gates, I could see the wedding party gathered near the central fountain, Beverly radiant in white, Keith handsome in his tuxedo, surrounded by their friends and family. Keith's 2 children stood nearby in matching formal wear, looking uncomfortable but dutiful. For a moment, I simply watched, struck by how little I recognized in the woman who was my daughter. When had she become this stranger who could smile so brightly while cutting her mother out of her life? Who could claim to love her children while treating them like accessories to be set aside and reclaimed at her convenience? Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and walked through the gates, my heels clicking steadily on the stone pathway. I timed my approach to coincide with a break in the photography session, when guests were mingling and the immediate pressure of posing had eased. Beverly saw me first, her smile freezing mid-laugh. The photographer, oblivious to the sudden tension, continued snapping pictures, inadvertently documenting the exact moment my daughter realized her perfect day would not proceed without interruption. "Mom," she said as I approached, her voice a mixture of shock and anger. "What are you doing here? I told you." "I'm not staying," I assured her quietly. "I just need 5 minutes of your time." Keith had noticed us now, excusing himself from a conversation to join his new wife. To his credit, he greeted me politely, though his eyes betrayed his wariness. "Mrs. Wright, congratulations on your daughter's marriage." "Thank you, Keith," I replied, appreciating his attempt at civility. "And congratulations to you both. I truly wish you every happiness." Beverly crossed her arms, the defensive posture at odds with her ethereal dress. "If you're here about the children, this isn't the time or place." "Actually," I countered gently, "it's exactly the right time. Today you're celebrating a new beginning, a commitment to building a family together. I'm here because I want that to succeed, for your sake and for Zoe and Noah's." Something in my tone must have registered, because Beverly's expression shifted slightly from hostility to reluctant curiosity. "What do you mean?" I opened the portfolio, removing the transition plan Patricia had prepared. "This is a proposal for how we could work together to help the children adjust to their new living situation. It's based on recommendations from family therapists who specialize in blended families and custody transitions." Beverly didn't take the document, but she didn't reject it outright either. Keith, however, reached for it with evident interest. "May I?" I handed it to him, noting Beverly's flash of irritation at his willingness to engage. As he scanned the first page, I continued, keeping my voice low and calm. "Beverly, you and I both want what's best for Zoe and Noah. We may disagree about what that looks like, but I know you love them. And because you love them, I'm asking you to consider that after 7 years in my home, an abrupt change would be traumatic for them." "They're resilient," she countered, though with less conviction than before. "Children adapt." "They do," I agreed. "But why force them to adapt overnight when we could make this transition gradual and supportive? Noah especially. You know how he struggles with change." Keith looked up from the document, his expression thoughtful. "This actually makes a lot of sense, Bev. It addresses most of the concerns your mom's lawyer raised, but gives us primary custody by the end of the process." Beverly shot him a betrayed look. "You're taking her side?" "There are no sides here," I interjected before Keith could respond. "Just adults who all want the children to thrive." Beverly's gaze returned to me, suspicion evident in her narrowed eyes. "Why the change of heart?" Last month, you were filing legal motions to prevent me from taking them at all. I shook my head. That's not what the motion said. It prevented any immediate change in custody until a proper transition plan could be established. This, I gestured to the document in Keith's hands, is that plan. And if we agree to this, you'll drop the legal proceedings? Beverly questioned. Yes, I confirmed. My only goal has been to ensure Zoe and Noah's well-being during this transition. If we can agree on how to do that without court intervention, I'd be relieved. Keith was nodding, already flipping to the second page of the proposal. Beverly, seeing his approval, crossed her arms tighter, a familiar gesture from her childhood, when she felt cornered. There's something you're not saying, she accused. What's the catch? I met her gaze directly, steeling myself for the hardest part of this conversation. The catch is that I need you to recognize what you're asking. Of me, for 7 years, those children have been my life. I've been there for every nightmare, every triumph, every skinned knee and school project. I'm not just their grandmother. I've been their mother in all the ways that matter day to day. Beverly flinched at the word mother, but I pressed on. I'm not asking you to give up your rights. I'm asking you to respect the relationship I've built with them, to acknowledge that suddenly removing me from their daily lives would hurt them. And yes, it would devastate me too. For the first time, something like understanding flickered in Beverly's eyes. Perhaps it was the break in my voice, or perhaps some long-dormant empathy was finally awakening. Whatever the cause, her defensive posture relaxed slightly. I never meant to hurt you, Mom, she said quietly. I finally have my life together. I can finally be the mother they deserve. I know, I said, and meant it. And that's wonderful. They need you, Beverly. They always have. But they need consistency, too. Keith, who had been reading while we talked, looked up. The visitation schedule seems reasonable, and I like the idea of joint decision-making for school and medical issues. You know their history better than we do at this point. Beverly took the document from him, finally examining it herself. I held my breath, watching her expression change as she absorbed the details, the carefully structured schedule, the provisions for holidays, the mechanisms for resolving disagreements. Without returning to court, "You've really thought this through," she admitted reluctantly. "Yes," I said simply, "because they matter that much." A wedding coordinator approached, glancing nervously between us. "Mrs. Harmon, the photographer is ready for the final set of portraits before we head to the reception." Beverly nodded acknowledgement but didn't move immediately. Instead, she folded the document and handed it back to Keith. "We'll discuss this tomorrow," she told me, her voice carefully neutral. After the wedding. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was an opening, a small crack in the wall of opposition she'd built. I would take it. "Thank you," I said, stepping back. "That's all I'm asking for, a discussion." As I turned to leave, Beverly called after me. "Mom." I paused, looking back at my daughter in her wedding gown, beautiful and vexing and eternally complicated, as all children are to their parents, I suppose. "Yes?" She hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. Then, with a slight softening of her features, "The kids made cards for us. For the wedding, they asked if you would be here." The unspoken question hung between us, a tentative bridge across the chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. "They can call me tonight," I offered, "before bed, if you'd like." Beverly nodded, the barest acknowledgement before turning back to her wedding party. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even agreement. But it was communication, the first genuine exchange we'd had in months. As I walked back to my car, the weight in my chest felt marginally lighter. The battle wasn't over, but perhaps the Terms of engagement were shifting from all-out war to something resembling negotiation. Thomas was sitting on the porch when I returned home, a fishing rod propped against the railing beside him. He stood as I approached, his weathered face questioning. "How did it go?" he asked, helping me up the steps despite my lack of need for assistance. An old-fashioned courtesy that had once irritated, but now oddly comforted me. "She's going to read the proposal," I reported, settling into the swing beside him. "Keith seems on board? I think he's been pushing for something more reasonable behind the scenes." Thomas nodded, relieved. "That's a good sign." "How was fishing?" I asked, changing the subject before emotions could overwhelm me. His face brightened, with genuine pleasure. "Noah caught 3 bluegill. You should have seen his face, Ellie, like he'd just won the Olympics." "And Zoe?" he chuckled. "She pretended to be disgusted by the worms, but ended up being better at baiting the hook than either of us." The image warmed me, reminding me of similar outings with Beverly when she was small. How strange life was. The circular nature of generations. The ways we repeat patterns without realizing it. "Where are they now?" I inquired, noticing the quiet house. "Noah's taking a bath. He fell in the lake trying to net a fish," Thomas explained with an amused shake of his head. "And Zoe's practicing her violin. She has a recital next week, apparently." "June 15th, I confirmed. "She's playing Vivaldi." We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the porch swing creaking gently, the evening air carrying the scent of jasmine from the arbor Thomas had built years ago. It felt almost normal, dangerously close to the domesticity we'd lost. "I've been thinking," Thomas said finally, disrupting the quiet, "about what happens next." I tensed, anticipating yet another upheaval. "What do you mean?" He turned to face me directly, his expression serious. "If Beverly agrees to the transition plan, the children will eventually be living with her full-time, and you'll be here, in this big house, alone." I bristled. "I'm perfectly capable of living independently, Thomas. I don't need Meadowbrook or any other babysitting service." "That's not what I meant," he clarified hastily. "I know you can take care of yourself. You've proven that beyond doubt these past 5 years." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "What I'm trying to say rather badly is that maybe you don't have to be alone." The implication hung in the air between us, startling in its directness. 5 years of separation, of building separate lives, and now he was suggesting. What exactly? "Thomas," I began cautiously, "if you're proposing what I think you are—" "I'm not proposing anything," he interrupted. "Not yet, anyway. I know I have no right to walk back into your life and expect things to be as they were. I left when you needed me most. That's not something easily forgiven or forgotten." I studied his face, noting the new lines around his eyes, the silver that now dominated his once dark beard. Time had changed us both physically, but the changes beneath the surface were more profound. I was no longer the accommodating wife who had often deferred to his decisions. He was no longer the restless husband who chafed at responsibility. "What are you suggesting, then?" I asked quietly. He reached for my hand, his touch tentative, as if expecting rejection. "I'm suggesting that we take our own transition plan. That we see if there's still something worth rebuilding between us. Not for the children's sake, but for our own." The proposition was simultaneously terrifying and tempting. To reopen that door meant risking pain I'd spent 5 years learning to live with. But to keep it closed meant potentially sacrificing a future that, despite everything, I found myself wanting to explore. "I don't know, Thomas," I admitted honestly. "So much has happened. We're different people now." "Yes," he agreed readily. "We are. But maybe the people we've become could build something better than what we had before. Something based on who we are now, not who we were trying to be then." Before I could respond, The screen door creaked open, and Noah appeared, his hair damp from his bath, wearing mismatched pajamas. "Grandma, you're home!" he exclaimed, launching himself onto my lap with characteristic exuberance. Grandpa took us fishing, and I caught 3 fish and I named them, but then we had to let them go because Grandpa says it's not nice to keep them in a bucket forever and ever. I hugged him close, savoring the clean little boy smell of him, the weight of his small body against mine. These were the moments I would miss most, the casual intimacy of daily life that couldn't be replicated in weekend visits or holiday gatherings. "That sounds like quite an adventure," I told him. "Did you thank Grandpa for taking you?" Noah nodded vigorously. "Uh-huh. And guess what? He said maybe next time we can go camping. Real camping with a tent and everything." I raised an eyebrow at Thomas, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I said maybe," he emphasized. "Someday." The implication wasn't lost on me, that there would be future outings, future opportunities for the 4 of us to be together. That whatever happened with Beverly and the custody arrangement, Thomas intended to remain present in the children's lives. In my life. Noah wiggled off my lap, already distracted by a lightning bug blinking in the gathering dusk. "Can I catch him, please?" "For a few minutes," I agreed. "Then it's bedtime." As he scrambled down the porch steps in pursuit of the insect, Thomas turned back to me. "You don't have to answer now," he said softly. "About us. Just think about it." I nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions churning within me. Gratitude for his return when I needed support most. Lingering hurt over his departure. Cautious hope for what might still be possible between us. "I will," I promised, and I meant it. The next morning, Beverly called. Her voice was subdued, lacking its usual defensive edge. "Mom? We read through the proposal." I held my breath, clutching the phone tighter. And it's reasonable," she conceded reluctantly. "Keith thinks it makes sense for the kids." Relief flooded through me so powerfully I had to sit down. "I'm glad to hear that. Does this mean you're willing to try it?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Yes, but I have some conditions of my own." "I'm listening," I assured her, already reaching for a notepad. "First, I want the transition period shortened to 4 months instead of 6. Second, I want them enrolled in Oakwood schools this fall, not midway through the year. And third," she hesitated, and I braced myself for some unreasonable demand. "Third, I want you to be part of the wedding photos we're retaking next. Weekend. The kids should have pictures with their grandmother." The unexpected concession brought tears to my eyes. "Beverly, yes, of course." "This doesn't mean everything is fixed between us," she warned quickly. "I'm still angry about the legal maneuvers. But Keith pointed out that we're asking a lot of you, giving up the children you've raised. It's not fair to cut you out completely." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of my role or my pain, but it was a start. A crack in the wall of resentment she'd built to justify her actions. "Thank you," I said simply, not wanting to overplay the moment. "Should we have Patricia and your lawyer draft a revised agreement?" "Yes," Beverly agreed. "And Mom?" "Yes." "Keith and I want you to come to dinner tomorrow, at the new house, with the kids, so they can see where they'll be living, and so we can start figuring out how to do this." The invitation was awkwardly extended but sincere. An olive branch I hadn't expected so soon. "I'd like that," I told her. "What time should we come?" 6 o'clock. "And Mom?" "Thomas is welcome too, if you want." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the sudden shift. From all-out conflict to tentative collaboration in the span of 24 hours, it seemed almost too good to be true. Thomas found me still sitting there minutes later, staring at the notepad where I'd scribbled Beverly's conditions. "Bad news?" he asked, concern evident in his furrowed brow. I looked up, a smile breaking through my shock. "No, actually. She's agreed to the transition plan, with some modifications. And she's invited us to dinner tomorrow, both of us, to see the new house." Thomas's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's unexpected." "Very," I agreed. "But I'll take it. Anything that puts the children's needs first is a win in my book." He sat beside me, gently taking the notepad to review Beverly's conditions. "These seem reasonable. 4 months is still long enough for a proper transition." I nodded, still processing the implications. She also invited me to be in their retaken wedding photos. "For the children's sake," she said. Thomas smiled. Beverly always did have trouble admitting when she was wrong. This is her way of extending an apology without actually saying the words. "You know her well," I acknowledged with a small laugh. How strange that after years apart, Thomas could still read our daughter so accurately, could still help me navigate the complicated relationship that had become even more fraught in his absence. "So dinner tomorrow," he mused. "All of us together. That should be interesting." "Terrifying, you mean?" I corrected wryly. He laughed, the sound warmer and more genuine than I'd heard from him in years. "That too. But Ellie, this is good. This is progress." "Yes," I agreed cautiously. "It is." What remained unspoken between us was the other kind of progress we'd been tentatively discussing, the possibility of rebuilding our own relationship amidst the changing family dynamics. If Beverly and I could find a path forward after months of conflict, was it so impossible that Thomas and I might do the same after years of separation? As if reading my thoughts, Thomas reached for my hand, his touch gentle but sure. "One day, at a time," he said softly. "For all of us." I nodded, allowing my fingers to curl around his. One day at a time. Outside, the summer afternoon stretched bright and promising. Through the window, I could see Zoe in the backyard, showing Noah how to make daisy chains, a skill I'd taught her years ago. The sight filled me with bittersweet emotion, joy in the present moment, awareness of its impermanence, hope for what might still lie ahead. Whatever came next, for the children, for Beverly and her new family, for Thomas and me. At least we were finally moving forward together, rather than pulling apart. It wasn't the future I'd planned, but perhaps it could be one I would eventually come to embrace. One day at a time. It was enough for now. The first dinner at Beverly and Keith's new house was as awkward as expected, with conversation stilted and smiles strained. But it was a beginning. The children had raced through the spacious rooms, exclaiming over their new bedrooms, while the adults sipped wine and navigated the delicate balance between past grievances and future cooperation. By the third visit a week later, things had begun to ease. Keith's children, Maddie, 14, and Josh, 12, had joined us, adding a new dynamic to the blended family experiment. "She has the exact same bedroom at Mom's house," I overheard, Zoe telling Maddie, showing off a treasured snow globe collection. "My grandma helped me put up shelves for them." The casual reference to my home as Mom's house caught me off guard, a reminder of how children adapt their language to fit complicated adult arrangements. In Zoe's world, she now had 2 mothers: Beverly, who had given birth to her but remained a peripheral figure for years, and me, who had raised her day to day. The distinction wasn't something we'd discussed explicitly, but it hung in the air whenever Beverly and I were together, an invisible current of tension beneath our careful civility. According to the transition plan, now formally signed by all parties and filed with the court, the children would spend 3 weekends per month at Beverly and Keith's for the first 8 weeks, then move to alternating weeks between households for another 8 weeks. By the 4-month mark, they would be living primarily with Beverly and Keith, spending every other weekend and one weeknight dinner with me. The schedule looked neat and reasonable on paper. Living it was messier. Noah had a meltdown the first time he stayed overnight without me, his anxiety manifesting in a refusal to sleep and ultimately a frantic midnight call for me to come get him. Beverly had been surprisingly understanding, agreeing that we should take the overnight stays more gradually for him while keeping Zoe on the original schedule. "I didn't realize how attached he was to your routines," she admitted when I arrived. Noah's tear-streaked face buried in my shoulder as soon as I walked through the door. "Keith thinks maybe we should keep his bedtime the same as at your house, use the same stories." It was the first time Beverly had acknowledged the impact of my parenting style, a small victory amid the challenges of transition. Thomas, meanwhile, had moved from the extended stay hotel to a small rental cottage 3 blocks from my house. Close enough to be actively involved with the children during their time with me, yet separate enough to respect the limbo our relationship still occupied. We hadn't discussed his suggestion about rebuilding our marriage since that evening on the porch swing, both of us tacitly agreeing to focus on the children's transition first. But something was shifting between us, evident in small moments. His hand lingering when he passed me a coffee mug, my instinctive step toward him when something amusing happened, the way our eyes sought each other across rooms. After decades together and years apart, we were rediscovering each other, proceeding with caution, but also with unmistakable intent. 6 weeks into the transition, Beverly called with an unexpected request. "Keith and I want to take the kids to his parents' lake house for 4th of July weekend," she explained. "His whole family will be there. It's their annual tradition." According to our agreement, the holiday weekend should have been split, with the children spending the actual 4th with me and the surrounding days with Beverly and Keith. "I know it's your holiday time," Beverly continued, surprisingly apologetic. "But it would mean a lot to Keith, and it's a chance for the kids to bond with their new extended family. A year ago, even 6 months ago, I would have resented the request, seen it as another example of Beverly prioritizing her new life over established commitments. But the weeks of cooperation had softened something in me, perhaps in her as well. "Let me think about it," I said, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. That evening, while Thomas and I prepared dinner, another domestic ritual we'd slipped back into with surprising ease, I mentioned Beverly's request. "The lake house is important to Keith's family," Thomas commented, dicing onions with the precision of someone who'd spent years helping me in the kitchen. "His father built it himself, from what I understand." I raised an eyebrow. "How do you know that?" Thomas shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Keith and I got to talking last week when I dropped the kids off. He's actually a pretty decent guy." The revelation that Thomas and Keith had developed some kind of rapport shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. While I'd been cautiously rebuilding my relationship with Beverly, Thomas had apparently been forming connections of his own with our new extended family. "What do you think I should do about the holiday?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. He set down his knife, turning to face me directly. "I think you should let them go." I felt a twinge of disappointment, having half hoped he would support my claim to the agreed-upon schedule. "Why?" "Because we're trying to build something here, Ellie. Something cooperative. And sometimes that means being flexible when it matters. To the other side." He hesitated, then added, "But I also think you should ask for something in return." I tilted my head, intrigued. "Like what?" "Like Labor Day weekend at the coast. The cabin we used to rent when Beverly was little is still available. I checked. We could take all the kids, maybe even invite Beverly and Keith for part of it." The suggestion startled me, not just the idea of a counteroffer, but the implication that Thomas and I would be hosting the excursion together, as a unit, as a couple. "You've been thinking about this," I observed. He smiled, a hint of the old Thomas in the curve of his lips. "I've been thinking about a lot of things." I called Beverly the next morning and proposed the exchange, 4th of July for Labor Day, with an invitation extended to her and Keith to join us at the coast for the final day if they wished. She agreed readily, seeming almost relieved by my flexibility. "Mom," she said just before we hung up, "I appreciate this. I know we've asked a lot of you, with the kids and everything." It wasn't a full apology for the months of tension, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the most I could expect from my stubborn daughter. "They're worth it," I replied simply. The 4th of July weekend without the children felt strange after years of constant responsibility. Thomas suggested we use the time to revisit old pastimes that had fallen by the wayside during our grandparenting years. We went hiking in the state park, ate dinner at a restaurant too fancy for children's menus, and spent a lazy afternoon at the art museum. Activities that reminded me of who we had been before life's complications had pulled us in different directions. On the evening of the 4th itself, we drove up to Overlook Point to watch fireworks, bringing a picnic and a bottle of wine like we had in the early years of our marriage. As dusk fell and the first colorful explosions lit the sky, Thomas reached for my hand. "I've missed this," he said quietly. "Not just the fireworks. Us." The simple statement hung between us, more significant than any grand declaration might have been. I squeezed his hand, acknowledging the truth in his words without needing to respond verbally. Some understandings transcend the necessity of speech. Later, as we walked from the car to my front porch, or perhaps it was our front porch again, the distinction blurring with each passing day, Thomas paused at the steps. "Ellie," he began, an uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice. "I've been thinking about what comes next. For us." I felt my pulse quicken, a flutter of anticipation mixed with lingering caution. "And what have you concluded?" "That I would like to come home," he said simply. "Not just to help with the children during the transition, not temporarily. Home for good, if you'll have me." Despite the weeks of increasing closeness, the explicit request caught me off guard. To have him back in my daily life, in my home, in my bed. It was both deeply desired and terrifying. The memory of his departure still lived in me, a scar that might always remain sensitive to touch. "Thomas," I began, not even sure myself what would follow. He shook his head gently. "You don't need to answer tonight. I know I hurt you when I left. I know trust doesn't return overnight. But I want you to know that I'm certain about this, about us. I've never been more certain of anything." The declaration hung in the warm summer air, weighty with significance. 5 years ago, I would have welcomed him back without hesitation, grateful simply for his return. Now, older and perhaps wiser, I recognize the need for clarity before commitment. "Why now?" I asked. "Is it because of the children? Because of the changes with Beverly?" He considered the question seriously, taking time to formulate his response. Another change from the Thomas who had left, who had often reacted impulsively in emotional moments. "Those are factors," he admitted honestly. "Seeing you stand up to Beverly, watching you fight for what's right, even when it was difficult. It reminded me of the strength I've always admired in you. And yes, wanting to be there for the children is part of it too." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the familiar cedar scent of his aftershave. "But mostly, Ellie, it's because these months together have shown me what I threw away. The partnership we had, the life we built. I was a fool to walk away from that. I don't expect you to forget that I did, but I'm hoping you might be willing to build something new with me now." It was perhaps the most direct, emotionally honest statement Thomas had ever made in 46 years of knowing each other. The man who had left would have made sweeping promises, grand gestures. This Thomas offered something more valuable: truth, acknowledgement, and the patience to wait for my decision. "I need time," I told him. Not a rejection, but a request for space to consider what reconciliation would truly mean. He nodded, unsurprised. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere this time. The children returned from the lake house sunburned and bubbling with stories of water skiing, campfires, and Keith's enormous extended family. Noah had apparently become the mascot of the weekend, doted on by Keith's mother and taught to fish by his father. Zoe, more reserved as always, had nonetheless formed a tentative friendship with Keith's niece Amelia, who also played violin. And Keith's dad has a workshop in the basement, Noah exclaimed, bouncing on his toes as he unpacked. He lets me use the little hammer and the special measuring thing that goes like this. He demonstrated with his hands, mimicking a tool I couldn't identify. A caliper, Thomas supplied, smiling at Noah's enthusiasm. It measures thickness. Yeah, that thing. And he said next time I can help him build a birdhouse. The casual mention of next time indicated how seamlessly the children were beginning to integrate into Keith's family traditions, a positive sign for the transition, but a bittersweet reminder of how their world was expanding beyond me. Beverly lingered after dropping them off, hovering in the kitchen while the children showed Thomas their souvenirs from the trip. Thank you again for switching weekends, she said, fiddling with her car keys. It really meant a lot to Keith. I nodded, busying myself with unpacking the children's laundry bag. They seemed to have had a wonderful time. They did, Beverly confirmed. Then, with a slight hesitation, we were wondering if the Labor Day invitation is still open for Keith and me to join you all at the coast on the last day. The request surprised me. I had made the offer partly as a diplomatic gesture, not entirely expecting them to accept. Of course, I assured her. We'd love to have you both. Beverly nodded, still lingering as if there was something more she wanted to say. Finally, she blurted, Is Dad moving back in? The directness of the question startled me. What makes you ask that? She shrugged, aiming for casualness but not quite achieving it. He's here all the time. The kids talk about him being around. For breakfast, for bedtime, and you both seem... She trailed off, searching for the word. We're working on things, I admitted, neither confirming nor denying her suspicion, taking it day by day. Beverly studied me, her expression unreadable. I was so angry when he left, she said finally, not just because of what it did to you, but because it felt like he was abandoning all of us. Again. The again caught my attention, a reference to Beverly's childhood perception that Thomas had been an emotionally distant father, physically present, but mentally absorbed, in his work and hobbies. It was a grievance she had aired during her turbulent teenage years, but rarely mentioned as an adult. He made a mistake, I said carefully. We all do. Beverly twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Do you think people can really change? Or do they just become better at hiding who they really are? The question revealed more about Beverly's own insecurities than her concern for my relationship with Thomas. I wondered suddenly if her fears, about Craig, about marriage in general, stemmed partly from watching her father walk away when things became difficult. I think, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, that people can grow. They can learn from their mistakes, develop new patterns, but it requires genuine acknowledgement of what went wrong and consistent effort to do better. Beverly nodded, absorbing my words with unexpected seriousness. Keith is different from Craig, she said abruptly. He shows up. He puts family first. He's teaching me how to do that too. The admission that she recognized her own shortcomings, as a parent that she was actively trying to improve, moved me deeply. I'm glad, I told her sincerely. The children deserve that. You deserve that too. She met my eyes briefly, a flash of the vulnerable girl she had once been visible, beneath the composed woman she had become. Thanks, Mom. As she left, I found myself reflecting on how our roles had reversed in subtle ways. Once, I had been the mother dispensing wisdom to a daughter finding her way. Now, we were two women navigating complex relationships, each learning from the other's mistakes and triumphs. The transition continued, with its inevitable challenges and unexpected moments of grace. Noah gradually adjusted to overnight stays at Beverly's house, comforted by the familiar bedtime routine they had adopted at my suggestion. Zoe, initially more accepting of the changes, hit a rough patch in week 8, becoming withdrawn and argumentative in both households. She misses her friends from the old neighborhood, Beverly reported during our weekly check-in call, another new tradition that had emerged from the transition plan. And she's nervous about starting at a new school in September. Has she talked about it? I asked, concerned by the uncharacteristic behavior from my typically composed granddaughter. Not directly, Beverly admitted. But she keeps bringing up things from your house. How her room is arranged there, the park down the street, her violin teacher. I sighed, recognizing the signs of a child struggling with divided loyalties. Would it help if I talked with her, or would that make things worse? The question would have sparked defensiveness in the old Beverly, but the weeks of cooperation had built a fragile trust between us. Actually, I think it might help, she said after a moment's thought. She's always been able to talk to you about things she won't tell me. The acknowledgement of my special connection with Zoe might have been difficult for Beverly to articulate, but it represented significant growth in our relationship. A month ago, she would have insisted on handling the situation herself, viewing my involvement as interference rather than support. That weekend, during Zoe's time at my house, I suggested we go for ice cream, just the two of us, a rare opportunity for one-on-one attention in our busy, blended family life. At the small parlor downtown, tucked into a corner booth with matching strawberry cones, I broached the subject gently. I hear you've been having a tough time lately, I said, keeping my tone conversational. Want to talk about it? Zoe shrugged, focusing intently on her ice cream. It's nothing. Doesn't seem like nothing, I persisted gently. You've always been my girl who speaks her mind. Something's bothering you, Zozo. The childhood nickname was the key that unlocked her reserve. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked up with eyes suddenly swimming with tears. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore, she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. At Mom's house I have to be one way, and at your house I'm someone else, and soon I'll be at a new school where nobody knows me at all. My heart ached at the existential dilemma facing this sensitive 10-year-old. Oh, sweetheart, you're always just Zoe, the same wonderful, talented, thoughtful girl no matter where you are. She shook her head, unconvinced. But it's different. At your house, I'm the big sister who's good at violin and reading. At Mom's house, I'm the little sister who doesn't know anything about their family jokes or rules. And Maddie already has all the friends at the new school, and I'll just be her weird little stepsister. The complexities of navigating a blended family identity, layered atop the typical anxieties of adolescence, were weighing heavily on her young shoulders. It's a lot of change all at once, I acknowledged, not trying to minimize her concerns. And it's okay to find that hard. She nodded miserably. Mom gets upset when I talk about missing things at your house. She thinks it means I don't want to live with her. This insight into Beverly's insecurities explained much about the tension Zoe was internalizing. Your mom is still figuring things out too, I explained carefully. She missed a lot of time with you, and she's trying to make up for that now. Sometimes that might make her extra sensitive. Like when she bought me all new clothes even though my old ones still fit? Zoe asked perceptively. I smiled at her astuteness. Exactly like that. She's trying to show her love the best way. She knows how. Zoe sighed, poking at her melting ice cream. It's just a lot to remember. All the different rules and expectations. What if we made a chart? I suggested. Not about rules, but about the things that stay the same no matter where you are. The constants in your life. She looked up, interested despite herself. Like what? Like people who love you. That's the same whether you're at my house or your mom's or school. The things you enjoy doing. The values that matter to you. Those don't change with your address. The idea seemed to comfort her. Over the next hour, we sketched out a Zoe's Constants chart on a napkin. A visual reminder that her core identity remained intact despite the shifting external circumstances. By the time we left the ice cream parlor, her step was lighter, her smile more genuine. That evening, I called Beverly to share insights from our conversation, carefully framing them as observations rather than criticisms of her parenting. She's worried about starting at a new school where Maddie already has an established social circle, I explained. Maybe there's a way for her to meet some classmates before September. Something separate from Maddie so she can form her own connections. Beverly was quiet for a moment, absorbing the suggestion. There's a summer arts program at the community center, she said finally. Several kids from her grade attend. I could enroll her for the August session. That's a wonderful idea, I encouraged. And Beverly? Zoe mentioned feeling caught between different expectations in each household. It might help if we could align some of our approaches, not identical rules, but similar enough that she doesn't feel like she's constantly having to switch gears. I braced for defensiveness, but Beverly surprised me again. Keith and I were just talking about that. We've noticed Noah seems calmer when we follow the same bedtime routine you use. Maybe we should compare notes on other things too. This invitation to share parenting strategies represented a monumental shift from the adversarial stance of just months ago. I'd like that, I told her sincerely. As summer progressed, we settled into a rhythm of cooperation that, while not always smooth, felt increasingly natural. The children began to adapt to their dual homes, comforted by the consistent involvement of all the adults in their lives. Thomas continued his patient courtship, giving me space to consider his request, while demonstrating through daily actions his commitment to staying. By early August, as we approached the third phase of the transition plan, the shift to the children living primarily with Beverly and Keith, I found myself facing the reality I had been avoiding. Soon, the house would be largely empty. The rooms that had echoed with children's laughter for 7 years would fall silent, except for alternate weekends and Wednesday dinners. The prospect was daunting, but no longer devastating. The gradual nature of the transition had allowed me to adjust incrementally, to envision a future that included the children without being defined solely by their presence. And then there was Thomas. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing, after the children had gone to bed, I turned to him with the decision I had been contemplating for weeks. Yes, I said simply. He looked at me quizzically. Yes to what? Yes to coming home, I clarified. Not because I need someone to fill the emptiness when the children leave, but because these months have shown me that we're better together than apart, that the partnership we're rebuilding is worth investing in. The slow smile that spread across his face held none of the triumphant relief I might have expected. Instead, it reflected something deeper: gratitude, humility, joy tempered by awareness of all we had nearly lost. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving us another chance. There will be conditions, I warned, only half joking. No disappearing when things get difficult. No unilateral decisions. We face challenges together, or not at all. He nodded solemnly. Agreed, on all counts. As if to seal the pact, he leaned forward and kissed me. Not the hesitant, questioning kisses we had cautiously exchanged in recent weeks, but something more definitive. A promise. A new beginning built on the weathered foundation of our shared history. When we finally separated, Thomas gestured toward the darkened house behind us. When should I move my things in? I considered the question, aware of how the timing would impact the children. Beverly, our entire fragile family ecosystem. After Labor Day, I decided, let's use the coast trip as a transition point, a chance for all of us to be together before the next phase begins. Thomas nodded, understanding the symmetry of my suggestion. Just as the children were moving to a new chapter in their lives, so too would we be embarking on our own fresh start. Labor Day it is, he agreed. Then, with a hesitant smile, should we tell the children? Beverly? I leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder against mine, a sensation both familiar and newly precious. Let's tell the children this weekend. As for Beverly, I smiled, thinking of my perceptive daughter's earlier question. I think she already knows. As we sat together in the gathering darkness, the porch swing creaking gently beneath us, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The future remained uncertain in many ways. How the children would ultimately adjust to their new living arrangement, how Beverly and I would continue to navigate our complicated relationship, how Thomas and I would remake our marriage after all that had transpired. But for perhaps the first time since Beverly had appeared on my doorstep with 2 small children and a suitcase 7 years ago, I wasn't facing that uncertainty alone. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Not just Thomas and I, but the entire messy, complicated, beautiful family we had become. The coastal cabin hadn't changed in 15 years. The same weathered blue exterior, the same creaking screen door, the same view of the Pacific stretching endlessly from the wraparound porch. What had changed was everything else. The constellation of people gathered within its walls, the relationships between us, and perhaps most significantly, me. Labor Day weekend arrived with perfect late summer weather, warm days giving way to cool evenings ideal for beach bonfires and stargazing. Thomas and I had arrived first, spending a quiet evening preparing the cabin before the children bounded in the following morning, their energy immediately transforming the sleepy space into a hive of activity. Can we go to the tide pools right now? Noah demanded before his backpack had even hit the floor. After lunch, I promised, accepting his enthusiastic hug. Let's get everyone settled first. Zoe approached more cautiously, taking in the cabin with curious eyes. Is this where Mom used to come when she was little? Every summer until she was about 14, I confirmed, watching her process this new connection to her mother's history. There are still some shells she collected in that glass jar on the windowsill. This revelation sent both children scurrying to examine the jar of weathered treasures, their usual rivalry temporarily suspended in the excitement of archaeological discovery. Look, Noah exclaimed, carefully lifting out a sand dollar. Mom found this one. The moment struck me with unexpected poignancy, these children connecting to Beverly's childhood self through objects I had preserved, creating a continuity that transcended the complicated adult relationships surrounding them. The weekend unfolded in a gentle rhythm of beach walks, sandcastle competitions, and evening board games. Thomas took charge of the outdoor cooking, his confidence in the kitchen having grown during our months of domestic rapprochement. I watched him teaching Noah how to safely build a fire for s'mores, the patient guidance he offered a stark contrast to the frustrated withdrawal that had characterized his earlier grandparenting stint. On Saturday afternoon, while the children napped, exhausted from a morning of wave jumping and shell hunting, Thomas and I walked along the shoreline, our footprints trailing behind us in the wet sand. I've been thinking about the house, he said, stooping to examine a particularly interesting piece of driftwood before tucking it into his pocket. A lifelong habit I had once found endearing, then irritating during our difficult years, and now somehow endearing again. What about it? I asked, curious about the direction of his thoughts. He straightened, squinting against the sunlight reflecting off the water. It's bigger than we need now, with the kids being at Beverly's most of the time. The observation hung between us, neither an accusation nor a suggestion, simply a statement of fact. The four-bedroom home that had seemed perfectly sized for raising two active grandchildren would indeed feel expansive, perhaps even empty, with just the two of us rattling around in it. "Are you suggesting we sell it?" I asked carefully, the idea both frightening and strangely liberating. Thomas shook his head. "Not necessarily. But I've been considering alternatives that might make sense for this next chapter." "Such as?" He took my hand, a gesture that had become natural again over the summer months. "What if we converted part of it? The lower level could become a separate apartment, private entrance, its own small kitchen. We could rent it to a graduate student or even offer it to Beverly and Keith for the children on their weekends with us, if they wanted more space." The suggestion was thoughtful, practical, and entirely unexpected. Exactly the kind of creative problem-solving that had attracted me to Thomas in our early years, before responsibilities and routines had dulled our collaborative edge. "You've given this real thought," I observed, impressed by the consideration he'd clearly invested. He nodded, looking slightly self-conscious. "I've been drawing up plans. Nothing final, just ideas. I wanted to be sure I had something concrete to offer when we discussed the future." Once, I might have been irritated by his unilateral planning. Now I recognized it as his way of contributing, of demonstrating his commitment to building something sustainable. "I'd like to see the plans," I told him. "I think it could work beautifully." Relief washed over his features. "Really? You're not attached to keeping everything as it is?" I laughed softly, the sound carrying over the rhythmic crash of waves. "Thomas, if these past months have taught me anything, it's that change isn't always something to fear. Sometimes it opens doors we didn't even know existed." He squeezed my hand, understanding the multi-layered meaning of my words. "Does that philosophy extend to other aspects of our lives as well?" I knew immediately what he was asking. Despite my agreement to his moving back in, we had maintained separate bedrooms during his visits, a physical representation of the emotional distance we were still navigating. "Yes," I said simply. "It does." His smile was worth the vulnerability the admission required. Sunday brought the final element of our weekend, Beverly and Keith arriving for the day, completing our unconventional family circle. I watched from the porch as their car pulled up, bracing myself for the inevitable awkwardness of this new configuration. To my surprise, it was Keith who exited first, immediately helping Maddie and Josh unload their overnight bags before approaching the cabin with a friendly wave. "Hope we're not too early," he called, climbing the steps with an ease that suggested he was genuinely comfortable in this gathering. "The kids couldn't wait to get here." Beverly emerged more slowly, her body language revealing the tension she still carried despite our improved relations. I moved to greet them, determined to set a positive tone. "You're right on time," I assured Keith, accepting his brief hug before turning to Beverly. "We're just about to start lunch. The children will be thrilled you're here." And they were, bursting from the cabin in a flurry of excitement upon hearing the new arrivals. Noah launched himself at Beverly with his typical exuberance, while Zoe engaged more reservedly with Keith's children, showing particular interest in Josh's new sketchpad. Thomas appeared from around the side of the cabin, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Perfect timing," he called. "The grill's almost ready." What might have been an excruciating day of forced politeness instead evolved into something genuinely pleasant. The children's excitement proved contagious, their uncomplicated joy in being together lifting the adults out of our complicated histories into a shared present. Keith and Thomas discovered a mutual interest in woodworking, spending an hour discussing techniques while setting up the volleyball net. Beverly and I found ourselves preparing the salad side by side in the kitchen, our movements falling into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. "This is nice," she admitted quietly, slicing cucumbers with practiced precision. "Different than I expected, but nice." I nodded, understanding the concession it took for her to acknowledge the success of an arrangement she had initially resisted. It is. I think it's what the children need, to see all the adults in their lives getting along, even if the circumstances aren't what any of us planned. Beverly was quiet for a moment, focused on her task. Then, almost hesitantly, "You and Dad seem good. Together, I mean." The observation wasn't a question, but I heard the inquiry beneath it. "We're working on it," I confirmed. "Taking our time, rebuilding slowly. He's moving back in after this weekend." She nodded, processing this information. "He's different. Now. Less. Distant." "Yes," I agreed, recognizing the subtle shift she had identified. "I think we both are. Time and separation have a way of clarifying what matters." Beverly set down her knife, turning to face me directly. "I owe you an apology, Mom." The words caught me off guard. Throughout our months of negotiation and gradual reconciliation, Beverly had acknowledged my role in the children's lives, respected my attachment to them, even made concessions to maintain my involvement, but she had never directly apologized for the pain her actions had caused. "For what, specifically?" I asked, not unkindly but wanting clarity. She sighed, pushing her hair back from her face in a gesture so reminiscent of her teenage self that it momentarily disoriented me. "For taking you for granted, for assuming you would just keep raising my children indefinitely without complaint, for trying to push you aside when it finally suited me to be a full-time mother." The admission, delivered without defensiveness or qualification, was perhaps the most mature thing I had ever heard from my daughter. I set down the serving bowl I'd been filling, giving her my full attention. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a great deal to me." "Keith helped me see it," she continued, a flush coloring her cheeks. "He pointed out how differently I would feel if someone tried to suddenly separate me from the kids now that I've bonded with them. How devastating that would be." I nodded, grateful for Keith's apparently positive influence on my daughter's capacity for empathy. "It hasn't been easy," I admitted, "but the transition plan has helped. Seeing the children regularly, staying involved in their lives, it makes the change bearable." Beverly hesitated, then asked the question that perhaps had been lingering. "Since our negotiations began, do you think I'm doing the right thing, taking them back now, after all this time?" The vulnerability in her voice reminded me that beneath the sometimes difficult adult was still my child, seeking reassurance, wanting to know she wasn't repeating past mistakes. "I think," I said carefully, "that you're ready now in ways you weren't before. You have stability, support, and most importantly, a genuine desire to be present for them. That makes all the difference." Relief softened her features. "I'm trying to be the kind of mother they deserve. The kind you were to me, even when I made it difficult." The acknowledgement of my mothering, something Beverly had rarely expressed directly, caught in my throat like a physical thing. Before I could formulate a response, Noah burst into the kitchen, followed closely by Josh. "Grandma! Mom! Can we go swimming now? Grandpa says the water's warm enough." The moment of connection between Beverly and me paused, but didn't dissipate. Instead, it seemed to expand to include these children who connected us, these lives we were jointly shepherding toward adulthood. "After lunch," we said in unison, then caught each other's eyes in surprised amusement at our synchronicity. The afternoon unfolded in a tapestry of simple pleasures. Beach volleyball matches with constantly shifting teams, a sandcastle competition judged by Thomas with exaggerated formality, and finally swimming in the surprisingly mild Pacific, the children's. Shrieks of delight carrying across the water. As the sun began its descent, Keith organized an impromptu clam bake, expertly directing the collection and preparation of our beachfront feast. Gathered around the bonfire that evening, wrapped in oversized beach towels against the cooling air, I found myself observing the unlikely family we had become. Thomas beside me, his arm casually draped across my shoulders. Beverly and Keith across the fire, their children, all four of them, sprawled around them in various attitudes of contentment. The flickers of firelight illuminated faces flushed with sun and happiness, momentarily erasing the strain of the months behind us. "We should make this a tradition," Keith suggested, poking at the fire with a driftwood stick. "Labor Day at the coast, every year." "With s'mores," Noah insisted through a mouthful of sticky marshmallow. "And the sandcastle contest," Zoe added. "But next year, I get Grandpa on my team. He actually knows how to make the towers stand up." The casual assumption of continuity, of future gatherings and lasting connections, warmed me more than the fire. These children, in their resilience and adaptability, had created a vision of family that transcended adult complexities. In their world, having multiple homes and extra parents and grandparents wasn't a deficiency, but an abundance. Later, after Beverly and Keith had departed with promises to see us Wednesday for the children's dinner visit, after the excited chatter had given way to the deep breathing of exhausted sleep, Thomas and I stood on the porch, watching moonlight shimmer across the dark water. "That went better than I think any of us expected," he observed, his voice soft in the night stillness. "It did," I agreed. Beverly even apologized, a genuine one, with no qualifiers or deflections. Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's significant. What prompted it?" "Keith, apparently. He seems to have a positive influence on her capacity for self-reflection." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "He's good for her, stable in ways Craig never was." We stood in comfortable silence, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. After a while, Thomas spoke again, his voice contemplative. "You know, when I left 5 years ago, I thought I was escaping an impossible situation. The burden of raising grandchildren at our age, the financial strain, the way it all felt so endless." I remained quiet, giving him space to articulate thoughts he had perhaps never fully expressed. But looking back now, I see that I wasn't really running from the responsibility. I was running from my fear of failing at it, of not being enough when you and the children needed me most. The admission held such raw honesty that it momentarily took my breath away. "Thomas." He shook, his head gently. "Let me finish. What I couldn't see then, what I understand now, is that we were never meant to do it perfectly. We were just meant to show up, day after day, doing our best with whatever challenges came our way." His words resonated with a truth I had gradually come to accept myself. That perfection was never the standard by which our grandparenting should be measured, only presence and persistent love. "And you did that," he continued, turning to face me fully. "When I faltered, you kept showing up. When Beverly disappeared, you created stability. When the legal battle seemed overwhelming, you fought with grace and wisdom." "I didn't feel graceful or wise most of the time," I admitted wryly. "Mostly I felt terrified and exhausted." He smiled, the moonlight softening the lines of his face. "That's what makes it remarkable, Ellie. You kept going despite the fear, despite the exhaustion. You built something beautiful from a situation that could have been merely survivable." His perception of my strength, so at odds with my own frequent sense of floundering, moved me deeply. "We built it together in the end," I corrected gently. "You came back when it mattered most." "I did," he acknowledged. "But only because you showed me it was possible to face our fears rather than run from them. The validation of my choice, to stand firm, to fight for what the children needed even when it would have been easier to acquiesce, filled some long empty space within me. Not because I needed Thomas's approval, but because his recognition confirmed what I had gradually come to understand myself. That the past 7 years, for all their challenges, had transformed me from someone who accommodated others' choices to someone who actively shaped her own life. "I'm proud of us," I said simply. "Of all of us." Beverly, for growing into the mother she can be. The children for their resilience. You for finding your way back. And yes, myself too, for discovering strengths I never knew I had. Thomas reached for my hand, his touch as familiar as my own heartbeat, yet somehow newly significant. So, what's next for us, Eleanor Wright? Beyond remodeling the lower level and adjusting to our empty-ish nest? The question held no anxiety, only curious anticipation. I smiled, considering possibilities that would have seemed unimaginable just months earlier. Maybe that trip to the Grand Canyon we've been postponing for 7 years, I suggested. A winter break, just the two of us. The children will be with Beverly and Keith for Christmas morning anyway. We could drive down afterward, see the new year in from the South Rim. I'd like that, Thomas said, his eyes crinkling with pleasure at the suggestion. And maybe in the spring, we could finally take that woodworking class you used to talk about. The casual way he remembered an interest I had mentioned years ago, the assumption of shared future plans stretching beyond the immediate challenges, these were the true indications of healing, of a relationship rebuilding on a foundation stronger than before. As if reading my thoughts, Thomas continued, "We have time now, Ellie. Time to rediscover who we are together, who we want to become. Time, that precious commodity that had seemed so scarce during the years of raising grandchildren, now stretching before us with new possibility. Not unlimited, certainly. We were in our 60s after all, with the awareness of mortality that inevitably accompanies that stage of life. But sufficient time to create something meaningful from the years remaining, something that honored the journey behind us while embracing the path ahead. Partners again, I said softly. In whatever comes next." Thomas's smile deepened, his eyes holding mine with the steady certainty that had first drawn me to him 46 years earlier. Partners always, just with better communication skills. This time around. I laughed, the sound carrying out over the moonlit ocean. And lower expectations for perfection. But higher ones for honesty, he countered, pulling me gently into his arms. As we stood together on that weathered porch, the cabin behind us filled with sleeping children and the ocean before us vast with possibility, I felt a sense of completion that transcended simple happiness. We had weathered a storm that might have destroyed us, as individuals, as a couple, as a family. Instead, we had emerged reconfigured but intact, wiser for having faced the tempest. Beverly and the children would return to Oakwood after the weekend, continuing the transition we had so carefully crafted. Thomas would move his belongings into our home, no longer my refuge, but our shared space once more. Life would proceed, with its inevitable challenges and unexpected joys. But in this moment, watching moonlight dance across water that had witnessed generations before us and would witness generations after, I understood with perfect clarity that the secret plan I had developed months ago had succeeded beyond my wildest hopes. Not because it had prevented change. It hadn't. Not because it had punished those who had hurt me. That had never been the goal. It had succeeded because it had transformed an ending into a beginning. A loss into an expansion, a broken family into something new and surprisingly beautiful. My grandchildren would always be part of my daily life, even if not under my roof. My husband had found his way home, not to the marriage we had before, but to something more honest and resilient. My daughter and I were crafting a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or resentment. None of it was what I had imagined when Beverly first appeared on my doorstep with 2 small children 7 years ago. All of it was infinitely more meaningful than the solitary future I had feared facing just months earlier. "We should go in," Thomas murmured after a while. "Early start tomorrow for the drive home." Home. The word held new resonance, no longer defined by a physical structure but by the connections between those who inhabited it, whether permanently or temporarily, whether related by blood or by choice. "In a minute," I replied, wanting to hold on to this moment of clarity just a little longer. The view is too beautiful to leave just yet. Thomas nodded, understanding as he always had the things I didn't explicitly say. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the eternal rhythm of waves against shore, bearing witness to the constant yet ever-changing nature of both the ocean before us and the love that had brought us back to each other's side. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.